All right. Hey, folks. So today we're going to talk about being a picky eater. Now, this is a topic of conversation which came up again with one of my clients last week, and it's something which has come up a lot over the years. And I wanted to do a big formal video on why people say this, why this occurs. So if you're a picky eater or you know somebody who is, then listen on. Firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any questions or comments about this video, pop them down below, your own experiences as well. And if you'd like to work with me on your own strength and physique goals, there's a link in the description. So firstly, let's just define what a picky eater is and what I've come across over the years as I've been working with people. Firstly, in general, they tend not to enjoy eating vegetables. So they see it more as a chore. Whereas like I quite like eating vegetables now. And I like the flavors of vegetables. I don't find them to be bland at all. For someone who's a picky eater, those vegetables will taste bland unless they're heavily seasoned or heavily cooked in a certain style with sauces. The other thing is protein intake. Protein generally tends to taste quite plain and unsatisfactory to them. So just having something like a sauteed chicken breast or a slice of steak, it would taste very, very plain to them unless they seasoned it heavily, sauced it, all that kind of stuff with a lot of extra calories. They can't just enjoy the taste of lean meat just for what it is. And thirdly, these people tend to be constantly on the lookout for a cheat day, cheat meal, or they're constantly just going off plan, or they just find problems where there are none with a dietary approach. They'll just niggle at things, go and try to like game the system, as it were. So if that describes you, or if that's something that you know of somebody else in your life, or you just find this topic interesting, that's what I'm talking about with regards to being a picky eater. So firstly, to discuss this, I'm going to start talking about the Mesolimbic dopamine system. That is a system in the brain which is responsible for rewarding you as a human being for things which are necessary for survival. So the mesolimbic dopamine system we've evolved to have that because it gets stimulated by all the things which we need for our survival, like eating food, sex, sleep, exercise, all the things that we need to do for survival. They get stimulated by this mesolimbic dopamine system. So if you think about it, if you're going on a date with someone, first date, or not first date, third date, whatever, if you go out to dinner and then you end up, if you're very lucky, you end up having a lot of vigorous sex with them, so exercise and sex, and then you go to sleep, that would be like an amazing evening. You would be just lots and lots of dopamine. It would feel fantastic. You'd probably feel a really good connection with that person, you know? So mesolimbic dopamine system is responsible for all the things which make us feel good, which are necessary for our survival. The basic things in life: eat, exercise, sex, sleep. Okay. Now it rewards us for that because that's how we propagate, that's how we stay alive, that's how we stay healthy. And in general, if you're not doing a lot of those things, you tend to seek out that rewarding behavior elsewhere. Like, for example, if you're not doing a lot of exercise or if you're not sleeping particularly well, you may well want to eat more because you're seeking that pleasure from somewhere else. So now, to carry on the discussion, I want to talk a bit about cocaine. So we've evolved these pleasure sensors for survival. Now, what cocaine does is it hijacks this process. So it hijacks that same mesolimbic dopamine system. However, the problem with cocaine and why it's so addictive is it rapidly desensitizes those pathways. Whereas regular food, just regular sleep, regular sex, you see a bit of a dopamine hit and then you relax again, okay? With cocaine, it hijacks the process and it rapidly desensitizes those same pathways. Now, as a result of that, because of the desensitization, you need progressively more and more cocaine to, one, elicit the same response, and two, just to feel steady. Now, that's a problem because those sensors are so desensitized, you're going to need to take more and more cocaine to feel just on the level. But also, other things that you do in life which would normally give you pleasure, like eating food, having sex, sleeping, exercising, they don't give you the same level of pleasure. So what happens is, with these unfortunate people who are, massively addicted to cocaine, is that's all they're interested in. That's how it takes over their entire life, and they become very sad stories. The other issue is that it causes a long-term change. So long-term, this desensitization is a chemical process which occurs long-term. It's not something which you can resensitize to easily. So we have a bad situation. Now, how is this related to hyperpalatable foods? Hyperpalatable foods work in the same way, on the same pathways. So like all food, and exercise and sex and all that kind of stuff, like I've been explaining, it lights up the same pathways. So hyperpalatable foods with really, really strong flavors, processed to really appeal and be addictive and moreish. I won't say addictive, but I'll say moreish. Hyperpalatable foods work on the same pathways. So the issue is, because it's such a strong stimulus, it desensitizes you in the same way as cocaine. Now, it's not to the same extent, so I don't want to confuse anyone. I'm not trying to say sugar is as addictive as cocaine, like it's not. However, food is generally more accessible, it's more socially acceptable, and it's more necessary for life than cocaine. So while hyperpalatable food is not as chemically addictive, definitely that's true. However, it is perhaps equally as pervasive in people's lives because, well, of all these things I've said. It's more accessible, it's more socially acceptable, all those things. If you think about hyperpalatable foods, due to sort of modern advertising, have become entrenched in our lifestyle. Like you think of Christmas. Should be a wonderful holiday to spend with your family, perhaps a religious occasion for many of you, but it's hijacked by advent calendars, chocolates everywhere. It's synonymous with that, Anyway, so you could argue that actually hyperpalatable foods are more pervasive than cocaine in people's lives, and for that reason they're more addictive. They are not chemically more addictive. We know that for certain. So we could argue that like hyperpalatable foods, porn, as access to our phones, is the cocaine of the masses. We could argue that hyperpalatable food and porn is the cocaine of the masses. So back to our picky eater. Now, similar to the cocaine user, the poor sort of sad cocaine user, like if you're trying to get clean from coke, because the desensitization is so long-term and severe, you have to get completely off coke to even have a chance of resensitizing yourself to everyday life and just feeling okay on a level. Because there's such severe long-term changes, and you lack any pleasure from anything else in life, you have to get completely off the cocaine for a long period of time to even feel like you're getting pleasure from life anymore, from anything. Now, with hyperpalatable foods, it's similar. But the good news is, as I've said, it's not as strong of a chemical addiction. So the process of resensitization is very possible. It's not like it's with cocaine users, there's always a bit of a question mark of whether they can really do it long term. With hyperpalatable foods, it's chemically not as addictive, so that's always has a high success rate. But the social entrenchment is far more dangerous. So, as I've said, advertising, social conventions, they can all cause a relapse. If you're constantly after that reward, so if you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm on a diet now, and you struggle with hyperpalatable foods, but I'm going to reward myself with a cheat day. I'm going to reward myself with a cheat meal. In the short term, that might be some of the worst thing you can do for your diet in success in the long term, because you're just lighting up those pathways again and desensitizing yourself to the pleasure you should get from real, good, minimally processed foods, and even things like exercise and sleep, and sex. So long term, sure, you might be able to add in a cheat day or a cheat meal or whatever, but in the short term, if you're in that position where you are the picky eater that I described at the beginning of the video, and you're trying to sort of get on this health kick, possibly the worst thing you could do in the short term is to succumb to some of those pleasures of hyperpalatable food, because then you'll desensitize yourself. Every time you'll take a step forward, you'll take another step back. And I've seen it happen where people are so focused on that cheat meal at the end of the week, it makes the rest of the week suck. Like, just to give you the example, like let's say Saturday night is, I don't know, pancakes and pancakes, honey and ice cream night, whatever, right? For those people who are picky eaters and who are that desensitized to pleasure from regular food, if they continue to have those pancakes and ice cream nights on Saturday night, well, every other night is not pancake and ice cream night. Every other night is not going to be as good as pancake and ice cream night. And you're constantly going to be hyper focused on that. And that level of desensitization will constantly be being renewed so that you are constantly after that hyper pleasure from hyper palatable foods and not able to actually exact pleasure from the foods which are good for us. So a solution to resensitize your palate and resensitize the mesolimbic dopamine system, you have to trust that the way you are now is not natural and it's fixable. For most people who are very, very addicted to hyperpalatable foods, I won't say most, but for some people who are very addicted to hyperpalatable foods, for those who particularly are at the beginning of their journey, who have really just been, let's say the last couple of years, have just been getting takeaways and eating like absolute crap, they're probably not in the gym training as hard as they should do either. Probably. They might be, but probably not. So, and that's due to the desensitization of the same pathways which reward you for exercise and proper, whole foods, as well as sex and sleep. The whole thing tends to break apart. If you're addicted to one thing, just like the cocaine, everything else tends to break apart as well. The more you can resensitize yourself to good food, regular sex, probably the more it will benefit other areas of your life as well. So the way to start to resensitize yourself is to firstly acknowledge that the way you feel, it's not normal. Okay? Like it's not normal to want hyperpalatable food all the time. It's not normal to not be able to derive pleasure from just regular plain vegetables, meats. Like vegetables taste great. There is a wide variety of vegetables, a wide variety of flavors, textures in vegetables and meats. They all taste fantastic. If you don't get that right now, if you're in your head arguing back, like that's a problem. If those natural vegetables taste fantastic. So your goal should be to enjoy things that are good for you. All the things that are good for you, like sleep, sex, food, exercise, that should be your goal. If all those things are a chore, it means you need this video. It means you need the suggestions. So things which aren't good for you, I won't say things which are potentially quite addictive, like hyperpalatable foods, they should feel hyperstimulating. They should feel like really, really wow, an overload, They shouldn't just feel normal. Like if you bite into a massive Snickers bar, it shouldn't just be like, and then vegetables feel like, ugh, terrible. That's an abnormal situation where you do need to fix things. So the first sort of fix is, get on a regular sort of eating approach which prioritizes protein and vegetables. And if you can stick to that for long enough, over time, you will resensitize. Now, there are more sledgehammer approaches to doing things. Okay, so a couple of ways which are very popular with people are fasting. Fasting works very much in the same way because essentially you do resensitize yourself to regular tastes and flavors very, very quickly because you just don't eat anything. Okay, and for a lot of people, fasting provides a lot of relief in that area, and it rapidly sort of resensitizes them to regular food. So when they go back to regular food, they're not as hungry all the time. It provides them with more self-control for all of these reasons. They're not looking for that high of palatable foods all the time just to feel steady, like all throughout the day, they're looking for cakes and donuts. Do a few days of fasting, do it consistently for a while, and all those cravings start to come down, and regular food starts to taste better. That's the first method that people use. The downfall for that method is if you carry on eating like crap in between the fasting phases, you're always going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're always going to use the fasting periods as a dam in the bridge of eating crap. Okay, that's not the goal. The goal is for it to permanently change your habits. So during the times you are eating in between the fasts, your goal should be to eat in a way which supports your long-term goals as much as you can. The second thing that people do is ketogenic diets. Nothing particularly special with ketogenic diets, but they do provide the same level of, they take you away from the hyperpalatable foods because generally you're not going to be having pizza and ice cream on, keto diets. So they take away a lot of the carbs. You still have a lot of the fats in. And I think when you're doing a keto diet, it probably works in your favor not to, excuse me, works in your favor not to do like dirty keto. Just do regular keto. If this is you, resensitize yourself to good foods lots of meats, lots of vegetables, and any extra calories coming from fat, which is fine. But it works very much the same way as fasting. It resensitizes those pathways which have been desensitized by the hyperpalatable food. So 3 strategies there. I mean, I personally utilize fasting quite a lot. Keto diet I have done in the past. It's one of those which my training ends up being quite heavily affected, so I don't really do it long term. I would argue that some small brief periods of fasting are very useful, but then they are only useful long term if in between the fasting periods you're actually working to create positive habits which can fuel you for life, so you can actually build muscle and not just be addicted to the dieting and addicted to the fasting process, because that can be quite dangerous too. Anything done to the extreme is not good. Right, folks, hopefully that was a useful video. This is something which, I mean, I'm probably going to forward to a lot of clients in the future, because I think it's a video that I had to make to fully explain my stance on why this phenomenon of people being picky eaters occurs. But for you guys, if it's relatable, it'd be nice to hear your stories based on this. Perhaps this was you many years ago. This was certainly me many years ago, and it's not me now. So it would be useful to hear from you guys. And if you would like to work with me on your own sort of habits and structures and sort of creating a better sort of outcome for your life in terms of health and aesthetics, then as I say, there's a link in the description. Get in touch and let's talk. All right, folks, have